everybody, and welcome back to Infernal Intercourse with me and Pastor Brian.
Hello.
So today we're kind of going to talk about a specific kind of evil that we're going to discuss, because we've talked about the nature of evil in general before, but in one of our episodes where we discussed redeeming bad boys and why this might make the character of Satan or the devil appealing to people, because is he redeemable? Can we bring him back to the good side of the force kind of thing? So to do that, you have to be redeemable, right? You have to be someone who has goodness in you, that you can become good again. You have to be Darth Vader, I guess, and, you know, at the end, choose to betray the Emperor because somewhere inside you was this little kernel of good all the time. So you could be redeemed, but that idea of redemption is fairly modern, according to at least Dr. Thomas Shippey, who's written some very interesting books. They're in my basement library. I don't have them here to show off, but if you look up Thomas Shippey's books, they're actually very interesting. So I want to throw this open to Brian, because I'm going to talk a little bit about Lord of the Rings in a minute, but Brian may have some comments on evilness and bad boys and redemption.
Yeah, that redeemable idea is seems like it is pretty important, because as you say, there's some good in them. But I mean, I always had issues with the Christian outlook, which says that we all have original sin, and not all Christians say that, but a lot, certainly in my Catholic background, and it just doesn't match up with the prime doctrine that we're in God's image and we're good, right? It just doesn't. Now, what they'll talk about is being fallen, but then that's going to be kind of more what we're talking about, right? So there is inherent good, and we fall, but then, of course, we can be redeemed. And, of course, Protestant Christians, a lot of them are going to go real far and say everyone's redeemed by the blood of Christ, right? And so, and then that becomes a moral question, because you and I talk about we don't believe in hell. And so then I've had people be very emotional about, well, what about the person who raped and murdered their loved one? Or what about Hitler, right? And so, but I always tend to think this idea of punishment, the way we do it, if we give that to God, but really that's just us reflecting ourselves, right? That doesn't seem like a loving, forgiving God would have an eternal punishment. So
It's like a very human desire to want to punish the people who have done bad things in our eyes, but God is supposed to be above us and better than us, right? Do you think that God would have a better plan than just punishing people in some kind of private torture chamber? Okay, so the reason that this sort of reminded me of Tolkien was that Tolkien was pretty Kantian. Things are pretty straight. You have your rules, you cannot break them, So the fact that Gollum is left alive at the end, basically to save the world, is because no one will kill him in cold blood, even though he's evil and he keeps betraying people. But the elves don't kill him. Gandalf doesn't kill him. Faramir wants to, and Frodo says no, and so Faramir's like, okay. So even at the end, where Frodo is jumped by Gollum right there at the cracks of doom, and Sam comes up and pulls Gollum off of Frodo and pulls his sword out, you think right there in the middle of a fist fight, he'd have every reason to kill Gollum because he just attacked Frodo, and Sam can't do it. And because no one decides to take the easy road and just say, hey, if we just kill him, that gets one more evil thing out of the world. Because of that, Gollum ends up being the one who saves everything. So it's, Tolkien's a little heavy-handed here, and like you cannot do immoral things. And that's how evil comes into being in the whole Lord of the Rings universe, is that people start choosing to do things that are wrong. And once you start crossing those lines, then you can find those lines easier to cross. The next time, maybe you cross a little bit faster, or the next time you don't even think about it. You've gone a little bit step further, and now even a little more immoral. And, you keep going, and pretty soon, you're off the charts, where you might look up and say, hey, I didn't think I was that I would do these bad things, but you have made all these choices. There's a whole chain of choices along the way, and maybe none of them are really big, But little by little, this is sort of eaten at you from the inside, and now you become someone who will do the bad things. But you didn't start out that way, and nothing in Tolkien starts out evil. Gandalf just comes out and says, nothing is evil in its beginning. Even Sauron was not so. So everybody starts off good. Everything starts off good. God only creates good. But if you allow that drip, drip, drip of making bad decisions over and over and over and over again, then you become bad, you become evil, you become empty inside. And you can become, at least in Lord of the Rings, the end result is you become a ring wraith where you have no physical form, you have no name, you have no free will. You literally, Gandalf says they're wearing all these black cloaks to give shape to their nothingness. Okay, they're literally empty people. And Dr. Shippey says that that's scary to us because even though that's a fantastical endpoint that we can't really reach in the real world, we can still see the process and understand that that's where we could go. It could happen to us. We could become wraiths in a sense because we can make those bad choices over and over. So as I was thinking about that, it's like, well, okay, so does that apply to Lucifer at all, right? Because we don't really have a lot of evil characters in Lucifer. Brian and I were discussing it before we started recording, and we came up with two. We thought perhaps Cain and Malcolm Graham in season 1 are people who have made those chains of decisions. They did not necessarily start off bad, but they have gotten to the point where framing other cops or killing people or whatever is not really a big deal for them anymore. They've gotten to that point where they have become wraiths in a sense. They've been twisted out of their original shape, and they have become these characters that engage in evil acts. Yet, our main character, who is supposed to be Satan, basically, is not like that, right? He is someone, we don't even know what he did to get kicked out of heaven. Maybe they'll tell us now that God's shown up. But he himself doesn't seem to cross those lines, right? He has these lines that I don't lie, I won't do this, I won't do that. And he doesn't cross them. So he is sure he lacks a lot of self-awareness. He's not very mature. I mean, in this last bit of season 5 here, Linda says something like he's the oldest, least mature person on the planet. And then she changes it and says, in the universe. And maybe not. I think he's probably a little more mature now than many of the other angels who are still relatively not self-aware, apparently. So yeah, it can be thoughtless and lack that kind of awareness. But evil, we haven't really seen him be evil. Maybe Michael can be described as evil in some way. Well, we don't really understand how Michael got there, so we don't know what kind of chain of events led to this evil twin idea. Thoughts on any of that now that I've rambled on for a while, Brian?
Well, yeah, there's so Cain is a character that I think reveals they wanted or needed Cain to be evil. I think. I mean, a serial killer, you can't get any more, and just the way they talked about that character before we put it together with Cain, they clearly wanted us to see that character as evil, but yet they wrote a 3-dimensional character that even the way they wrote it seemed to love. Now, I know we can talk about malignant narcissists and how they can use that as a manipulation, but they didn't write really Cain that way. They wrote Cain to have even love and friendship and attraction. And so I think it reveals the fact that they don't believe people are evil either. I mean, I think when you talk about that drip by drip by drip, I think that's a really key theory about, because otherwise, how do humans do such horrible things? And there are studies on that, and so I think this show, and I think it's a credit to the show if they would take it, is it's amazing to show pathos and suffering and humanity without reducing it again to a binary of good and evil, right? I think that people are good, and even in those Hitlers or even wraiths, I don't think they show anything near a wraith here. which I think is interesting that you say empty inside, and I agree with that depiction of several forms of evil. But our contemporary way of looking at evil tends to be like rotten. Even medieval is like that we're rotting from the inside, not that we're empty on the inside. And empty on the inside is far more terrifying.
Yeah, there are many instances in Lord of the Rings where we see that when Frodo puts the ring on Hen, and he sees into the pupil of Sauron, and behind it is just nothing but emptiness. And when he and Sam are walking past Minas Morgul, they see the windows that are described as opening inward into emptiness. You think windows are normally things that you look outward from, but not in Minas Morgul. They look inward into emptiness. So things are empty when they're evil in Tolkien, and things have been worn away until they've eroded and there's nothing left. So even like the mouth of Sauron, he started off as a guy. He's a human, but he has changed over time to where he is the mouth of Sauron, which is a title, not a name. So he's lost his name, he's lost his free will, and he's just this sort of, guy who gives voice to Sauron's will, but he has none of his own. So I don't think see that kind of level of evil in Lucifer, but we do get at least a couple of characters who have chosen to do bad things. And in a way, I guess Charlotte Richards was one of those where she had gone into a spot where she didn't necessarily realize, I guess, how evil she was. Because there are a couple of times in season 3 where she would kind of like pop up and say something that was objectionable, but most people would think was bad. And then she'd look around and realize she said something that people objected to. And then she had to like take back and be a little more self-aware and realize, you know what, that maybe that course of action isn't what we should do if you're a good person, right? Because she's trying to be better. She's trying to redeem herself. So she then quits her job and starts working in the public defender's office and trying to figure out how to help people and how to help the system and help the world be a better place. And it's not that easy for her because she's gone down that path so far that she, was apparently, getting rid of bodies and doing all kinds of, things. And now it's like, how do I come back from that?
And it bothered me in this series because they basically made her irredeemable because she actually put effort into trying to redeem herself, but they still kept making it feel like she was going to hell no matter what. And that doesn't seem consistent with well, in some ways, I guess it could be, but it just felt like if they believe in redeemability, she certainly earned it. And of course, she was more given it, right, than them treating it like she earned it. I think Gollum is a good example, and I'll admit I'm colored by the movies because I haven't read Tolkien, since I was maybe in high school, but I saw the movies in the 2000s, and Gollum to me was very sympathetic at many moments in the way they portrayed him in the movies. Like you could definitely see. I'll call it the humanity in Gollum in many places. Certainly seemed like somebody that was acting out of like a hurt id, or terror or fear, as opposed to someone who was empty or malicious. Right?
Well, you get the conversations between like the good Gollum and the bad Gollum in a sense, So it's like he's starting to see that he might be redeemable, but at the same time, he's had 500 years of not doing anything very nice. So, and he started off as not a jerk, but a murdering jerk because he kills his cousin to get that ring from him. So, he wasn't maybe a great guy to begin with, but now he's worse. But now he's starting to come back a little bit. So you still get the idea that, maybe you can. As much as you can erode out from the inside, maybe you can put some things back in there too.
And I think about if they had been able to grant Cain a way to die earlier, right? Because of course it makes sense if you absorb all of humanity for millennia, it's going to destroy. It's going to destroy. Well, we've talked about this before, right? There's so much. It's going to destroy so much about you that we're just not built to take that in our psyche. So even in that, it almost feels like, he's certainly not all evil. And even the bad cop. I mean, a lot of people do a lot of bad stuff out of self-interest, and then they find themselves covering up for it,
Yeah, and we don't see a lot of that before he dies, because when the show begins, he's in a coma, and then he dies, and then M.Div brings him back and tells him that there's this deal: you can come back, but you have to do what I say, and you need to kill Lucifer. But at that point, he's been in hell, and because we've been told that time works differently there, the 30 seconds he was dead in this realm maybe translates to months or years in hell, so he's been tortured for a long time, and when he gets back, he can't stop trying to, I guess, negate his hell loop, right? Because he says, the fact is, I love life, I love, good food, I love things that are pleasurable, and now I can't get enough of them, because that's how they tortured me in hell. They kept me from eating, they kept me from drinking, they kept me from having those pleasurable things that make life, fun or important or worth living. And so now I can't get enough milkshakes or enough hamburgers or enough whatever it is that gives me pleasure, and because I know that it will be withheld from me when I die and go back to hell. So we see him in this sort of manic, post-death Malcolm Graham, which apparently is worse, than the pre-death Malcolm Graham.
And it's interesting because you would think that would destroy a person. That would drive a person to evil even much more than any experience here on earth, except maybe Cain's, right? But,
okay, so any other thoughts on evil and how it is depicted in Lucifer?
I do think it's an important conversation and an important decision, I guess, for individuals to make about whether evil is an act that a human with some goodness does, or whether certain acts at a certain point make you completely evil, right? I just think that's...
Okay, so if you have comments on what constitutes evil and is there evil in the show Lucifer, then you can leave us those comments. We'll appreciate seeing them. So if you enjoyed this, please hit the like and subscribe and the little bell notification so you know when I put more videos up. And we appreciate you watching this. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.